Hi everyone, Howdy McCoskey here with another video on Howdy McCoskey Talks, which I guess I have to say at the beginning now. There seems to be someone on BitchUte who has been stealing a few of my videos and putting them up as if he had done them. But this is me and my channel, and today we are bringing a video on the Knights Templar, the next in the series of Southern France mysteries. I was originally going to talk about the surrounding countryside, more of the other stories, but given the world situation, perhaps a look at the Knights Templar and its story will help get some understanding of where we also are right now. I'm not going to go into massive detail. I had about 40 pages of notes. I've worked them down to 9. So I'm going to present 9 pages of notes today. We're going to look at the Knights Templar. We can't just look at the Knights Templar in a vacuum. We have to look at things like the Knights of Malta, the St. John's Hospitaliers. We have to look at the Order of the Holy Sepulcher. I'm going to look into some of the hidden secrets, you might say, of the Templar, and end with some discussion of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. And again, end finally with a few clues that might give you an idea where some of this research is leading. I don't want to say everything openly yet, just provide you the clues and provide you some ideas to see where this is going. So let's begin with the Knights Templar, who of course became very popular starting in the 1980s. They started sort of a resurgence thanks to all the books that began to be written about them. There's always the belief that they held a very precious secret, sometimes described as the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, the body of Jesus, and it was for this secret that they were killed in 1307. Now, it's important to know that we don't really have a true and complete history of the Knights Templar. We certainly don't have even almost anything from the Knights Templar directly. The Catholic Church had them destroyed just like they did the Cathars, and in fact, I don't think there was much of a time frame difference between killing the Cathars and killing the Knights Templar. I think that's history trying to put one event and split it into 2 specific time frames. I think both of them happened at the exact same time. To me, the Cathars and the Knights Templar are incredibly linked, and you might almost think of the Cathars as the spiritual part of the entire organization. So with that in mind, all we have is the standard story that is presented on this group, which is odd to say the least, which has huge holes and huge gaps in it. And I'm just trying to pull some of that out for you to see if you want to dig further into this field of research. Don't instantly tell me that, I'm not right because of this, and this. Nobody's right at this point. Nobody can know for sure who the Knights Templar were, what their story was, what they did, what they knew. It's all speculation. But I'm going to try to present a few clues that I think give some insight into who this group really was. And to know the Knights Templar, I think to actually understand them, you've also got to understand what I think is their opposite, the Knights Hospitalier, also known as the Knights of Malta. That they've always been portrayed as similar organizations working together, when to me I see them as 2 distinct opposites, in fact, enemies of each other. The official name of the Templars were the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ, and of the Temple of Solomon, and the Order of the Temple. Again, you can't just look at this group on its own. You must look at all of the other knight societies of the period, which include the Tuetonic Knights, the Knights of St. Lazarus. In the next episode, we'll take this further into the 1600s, where we'll see things like the Company Saint-Sacrament and the Society of St. Sulpice, what was going on with Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin in the United States, what was happening with Christian Rosenkreuz. So the story of the Templars, while seems to end in the 1300s, restarts again in the 1600s, sort of in a new form, in a new way, right at the time that Poussin is making his paintings, just at the end of as the Renaissance is ending. The resistance links back to the time of the First Crusade, in which the Pope demanded that Christian Europe send its soldiers to the Middle East and take back the Holy Land from the Muslim conquerors. One of those initial soldier leaders was Godfrey de Bouillon, who came from an area in northern France near modern Belgium. As will a knight some 20 years later called Hugh de Payens, who with 7 other knights will supposedly start the Knights Templar. In just less than 100 years later, in around 1880, this very area that Payens comes from and the very rough area that Godfrey de Bouillon comes from is the place that writer Chrétien de Troyes will write the first Grail romance. All of it is linked. All of this information is all linked, be it the Templars, the Cathars, the Holy Grail. It's one story. Bouillon was part of the capture of Jerusalem in 1099. And on the 22nd of July, a council was set up to determine who should form the new government. In essence, to set up a Christian king of Jerusalem. Raymond of Toulouse, another Frenchman, refused. But Godfrey accepted the post, but not the title. He demanded instead only to be thought of as a secular leader. A coat of arms for Jerusalem was created, one that included a yellow, what would be called a Templar cross, and 4 small iron crosses within it. In fact, there it is on the screen. This would in fact become the emblem of a group that he started that very same year, known as the Order of the Holy Sepulcher. On Godfrey's death just 1 year later, he only was in charge for a year before he died, Godfrey's brother took the post as the first king of Jerusalem, Baldwin I. Now, of course, you have to ask, well, why would Godfrey's brother take the post? Or why would Godfrey himself take the post and not the title? Well, the brother took both. And again, what is their link with the Grail? Well, it doesn't take long to find out. In 1118, Baldwin I dies, and a new king takes over, who gives himself the name Baldwin II. And while he's not blood related to his previous king, he does refer to Baldwin and Geoffrey as his brothers. And this tends to speculate that they were already some type of organization or brotherhood. In around the year 1119, supposedly, another French knight makes an appearance. This is Hugh de Payens, who shows up with 7 other knights. That makes the hermetic number of 8 of Tahute and Hermes, with the idea of protecting pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Of course, how exactly 8 knights are going to be able to protect thousands of people going from Europe to the Holy Land has never been properly explained. And as for Hughes, he has almost nothing of a biography. It's almost like he just arrived out of nowhere. They've tried to place his background, calling him Hugh of Payens near Troy, so the reference linking him to Godfrey and linking him to Grail territory. But that, of course, might just be literary license or might just be part of the myth. There's other myths that claim he comes from the Languedoc in southern France. Realistically, he could come from just about anywhere. One early chronicle, Simon de Saint-Bertin, implies that the Knights Templar originated far earlier, well before the death of Godfrey de Bouillon in 1100. Quote, "While Godfrey was reigning magnificently, some had decided not to return to the shadows of the world after suffering such dangers for God's sake. On the advice of the princes of God's army, they vowed themselves to God's temple under this rule. They would renounce the world, give up personal goods, free themselves to pursue purity, and lead a communal life, wearing a poor habit, only using arms to defend the land against the attacks of insurgent pagans who when necessarily demanded." The standard account claims that Hugh de Payens preached Baldwin II of Jerusalem, who of course began in 1118, so sometime after that, with these 7 other knights, all of whom were relatives either by blood or marriage, in order to form the Order of the Knights Templar. Now, of course, something very odd happens in the story. Baldwin gives them special residence in the Temple Mount, the most sacred spot of all 3 Western religions, which is supposedly on top of the Temple of Solomon. For years, the 8 founding members of the Knights Templar are doing one thing: digging. They're looking for something. They seem to stay 4 or 5 years, all of a sudden pack up and return to France. Whatever it is they seem to found made them extremely powerful. The first question to ask is, Why does Baldwin allow them to have the Temple Mount, and why does he allow them to dig there? Especially because there's supposed to be another order that's already been formed much earlier in 1113, known as the Knights Hospitalier, the ones I call the Anti-Templars. Why did they not get the ability to dig? Or were they given the ability to dig and they came up empty in the search? And since they failed, this new group was given a shot. It seems to me that right away, something tells me the way this story is set up, the Hospitaliers and the Templars are enemies from the get-go. Supposedly, the reason that the name of this group became the Templars is because they had this first headquarters and assignment at the Temple Mount, the Temple of Solomon. But I feel there's another temple that this is referencing, and we'll get to that at the end of this video. The new order took on the name the Poor Knights of Christ. Their emblem was two knights riding on a single horse, emphasizing the order's poverty. The Latin rule of the order was confirmed at the Council of Troyes, there we are, back in Grail land, in 1129. The impoverished status of the Templars did not last long. They had a very powerful advocate in St. Bernard of Clairvaux, head of the Cistercian monks, and some suggest the actual originator of sending Hugues de Payens to Jerusalem in the first place. Bernard wrote pervasively on behalf of the latter in his speech in praise of a new knighthood, and it was his influence that got the order endorsed by the Catholic Church in 1129. It grew rapidly in membership and power, and with the Church's formal blessing, the Templars became the favored charity throughout Christendom, receiving money, land, businesses, and noble-born sons from family who were eager to help with the fight in the Holy Land. Bernard de Clairvaux and Hugh de Payens devised a special code of behavior for the Templars, known to modern historians as the Latin Rule. It has 72 clauses, 72 which is a key number in both procession and linked to Osiris, and defined the ideal behavior for knights, such as the type of garments they were able to wear, how many horses they could have. Knights were supposed to take their meals in silence, eat meat no more than 3 times a week, and not have physical contact of any kind with women, even members of their own family. The knights would wear a white surcoat with a red cross, and also a white mantle, also with a red cross. The sergeants would wear a black tunic with a red cross on the front and a black or brown mantle. New members to the order had to willingly sign over all of their wealth and goods and take vows of poverty, chastity, piety, and obedience. Most brothers joined for life, although some were allowed to join for a set period. Sometimes a married man was allowed to join if he had his wife's permission, but he was not allowed to wear the white mantle. Some people don't seem to know this, but they also had female members. There was a group of female warriors of a special order. An account of late 12th century England speaks of women being received into the temple as sisters and seems to imply there was a feminine part to the order. It's surprising that this is rarely mentioned by historians or scholars. What's interesting is that Hughes is supposed to have asked Bernard of Clairvaux if he would sponsor the order. But documents that have been found in Seborga, Italy, seem to prove that it was the other way around, that it was Bernard connected with Hughes far earlier than 1118. The documents suggest that Bernard may have created a monastery in Surbogoda in 1113, and then went there specifically to release 2 specific monks from their vows, one being Hugues de Payens, the other being Bernard's uncle, André de Montbard, who, as it turns out, was another of the 8 Knights Templar founders. Some historians have tried to claim that it was too early for Bernard to be building monasteries and setting up orders, but I'll leave that for the historians to discuss. For sure, in 1128-29, Bernard used the Pope's visit to Troy for council to champion the need for the Knights Templar, essentially a private army of the Pope. But we'll see, the Pope already has a private army. Why does he need another one? Grand Master de Payens leads the order for almost 20 years until his death, including stories of visits to England and Scotland in 1128, and being married to Catherine St. Clair, which would link him to Rosslyn Chapel and the entire early history of the Grail romances. Again, no one knows anything for sure of this guy. It seems that he dies, apparently in Palestine, in 1136, but they're not recorded in any chronicle, though Templars seem to to commemorate his death every year on May the 24th. The Templars get their next major benefit in 1139, when the Pope's papal bull Omne Datum Omnium exempted the order from obedience to local laws. This ruling meant that the Templars could pass freely through all borders, were not required to pay any taxes, and were exempt from all authority except the Pope. And while there was a fighting arm of the group that existed in the Holy Land fighting in the Crusades, Templars were often advanced forces in key battles. Most of what the Templar Knights were was a giant economic infrastructure throughout all of Christendom, innovating amazing financial techniques in the early forms of banking and building fortifications. But there's also a deeply religious inner order that's a part of the Knights Templar that almost no one knows anything about. But as I say, for all we're going to hear about the Templars and the information about them and their strange and interesting stories, they're not the only ones that are running amok at this period of time. 5 major orders were formed in the Holy Land between the 11th century and the early 12th century. The Knights of the Holy Sepulcher, around 1099, the Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitalier, again in the 10th century, the Knights of the Hospital of St. Mary of Jerusalem, the Tuetonic Knights, and the Knights of St. Lazarus. So, you ever taken a course by the St. John's Ambulance Group? Got a first aid kit with their logo at home? What you might not know is that is part of this very early secret group, and seemingly similar Knights to the Templars, who are now known as the Knights of Malta, but were originally the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, the Knights Hospitalier. This group was founded in Jerusalem supposedly around 1050, but there is a history that goes back to 600 AD, as a hospital to provide care for poor and sick pilgrims in the Holy Land. So officially, this group was found before the Knights Templar. And again, you can read as much of this history as you want. This is just bare bones, basic information. What is known is that their patron saint is John the Baptist, the very one that the Cathars, who are linked closely to the Knights Templar, claimed was the Antichrist. So right away, I want you to keep this in mind. Were the Cathars thus saying that the biblical figure of John the Baptist was the Antichrist? Or perhaps is that some sort of warped misunderstanding that actually they're saying the Knights of St. John Hospitalier, who would be following St. John the Baptist, that they were the agents of the Antichrist? Think about it. Their bull came in February 1113, and the hospital became an order, again exempt from the local church. Hospitaliers took 3 monastic vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. As time went on, they adopted the white 8-pointed cross that is still its symbol today. The 8 points are supposed to represent the 8 beatitudes that Jesus referred to in the Sermon on the Mount. When the Christian-held territories were lost to the Muslims in the 1300s, they moved to Rhodes and took over all of the Templar holdings after the Templars had been killed. They later were forced to go to Malta in 1530 and stayed there until 1798. It is here that they take their new name, the Knights of Malta. They stayed there until the ejection of the order from Napoleon Bonaparte, as we will discuss. Today, they still exist, and their modern head office is in Rome. It retains its claims of sovereignty under international law. It has been granted permanent observer status at the United Nations. It has its own international passports for travel, postage stamps, along with formal insignia, and is often portrayed as a white or gold Maltese cross. I've been when I was in Rome to check these places out. They have 2, I don't think you can call them headquarters. They're fairly large locations, okay. They have a few castles. They have a place still in Malta. That's it. But they've got their own passports. They've got their own, basically, they operate as their own country, similar to the Vatican and the United Nations. They have an observer at the United Nations. And in total, they have now 13,000 members, 80,000 permanent members, 20,000 medical personnel, including doctors, nurses, and paramedics in more than 120 countries. In several countries, including France, Germany, and Ireland, the local associations of this order are important providers of first aid training, first aid services, and emergency medical services. Initially, the group cared for pilgrims in Jerusalem, but the order soon extended to providing pilgrims with an armed escort and soon grew into a substantial force. There was a specific military dress for the Hospitaliers to be worn in battle. And for them, they needed to wear a red surcoat with a white cross emblazoned on it, which of course puts them the exact opposite of the Templars, who have a red cross on a white coat. Again, a reminder, they wound up in Malta in 1530 when the king of Sicily gave them the island, along with Gozo and the North African port of Tripoli, in an exchange for an annual fee of 1 Maltese falcon. This, of course, became a part of Dashiell Hammett's famous book, The Maltese Falcon. However, once they got to Malta, the Crusades were over. There was really nothing for them to do. So with nothing to still with costs and not wanting to be a meaningless organization, they turned their attention to policing the Mediterranean from the increasing threat of piracy, most noticeably the threat of Ottoman-endorsed Barbary coasters from the North African coastline. Interestingly, in 1489, Pope Innocent suppressed the order and ruled that it be merged with the Knights Hospitalier. I'm sorry, this is the Order of the Holy Sepulcher. I'm sorry. The Order of the Holy Sepulcher, which I need to quickly bring into, which seems to have been an early form of the Knights Templar, formed in 1099. Again, you can go and look up all the stuff on the Order of the Holy Sepulcher. It also still exists. It's one of the 2 orders that still exists today. It also has its headquarters in Rome. It also has special status from the Vatican. But that order was suppressed in 1489 and was supposed to merge with the Knights Hospitalier. This is very important, this idea of merging, and everyone merges with the Hospitaliers and the Knights of Malta. They are the merge group. But for some reason in 1496, just 7 years later, Pope Alexander restores the Order of the Holy Sepulcher to independent status. So it's almost like maybe the Order of the Holy Sepulcher, which was a lingering group of the Knights Templar, was still semi-surviving. But they soon merged it with the Knights of Malta once that order had been infiltrated and, you might say, cleaned out. Then they could resplit them again and pretend like they're back to 2 orders when really you have just 1 order with 2 different names. Similar to modern politics, where you think you have 2 different sides that you're voting for, when of course you're just voting for, cancer or leukemia. There's another group section to the Hospitaliers, and that's a German order, the Order of the Brothers of the German House of St. Mary in Jerusalem, also known as the Tuetonic Knights. They were basically there for German-speaking pilgrims coming to the Holy Land, and it was decided they needed a special German-speaking offshoot. These knights wore a white surcoat with a black cross, and this image was later used in military decoration and insignias by the Kingdom of Prussia and Germany as the Iron Cross. The motto of the order was Help, Defend, Heal, and it was a major player in wars of the late Middle Ages around Germany and Poland. The order kept considerable holdings in Catholic areas of Germany until 1809 when, again, Napoleon Bonaparte ordered its dissolution and the order lost its secular holdings. The order was re-established with the end of Napoleon and kept itself as a charitable and ceremonial body, but it was outlawed by Hitler in 1938 and was re-established again once the end of the Second World War happened in 1945. Again, we need to keep all of these interesting little tidbits in mind as we discuss and try to figure out who these Knights organizations were and what they were involved in. With that in mind, now that we have a little bit of background, now we can go in a bit deeper into the Templars themselves and see if we can unravel some stories of them. And the first that they're one of the most famous for, of course, beyond their, what you might call incredible warlike deeds in the Middle East, is their banking and their building. While the primary mission of the Templars was military, very few members were actually combatants. Mostly, they were there to manage a financial and spiritual infrastructure. While the order and its members were sworn to poverty, they wound up having wealth beyond their means, partially through direct donations. What they did is any nobleman who was interested in participating in the Crusades would place all of his assets under Templar management while he was away. And now the order's original mission of guarding pilgrims had changed into a mission to guarding their valuables. And they did it through a very innovative way of issuing letters of credit, an early precursor of modern banking. You would visit a Templar house in their home country and deposit their deeds and valuables. The Templars would then give that person a letter which would describe their holdings. In order to assure the letters could not be stolen and used, a supposedly uncracked cipher was used within the documents. Now remember that supposedly this Templar code has not actually been broken today, as far as I understand. That no one actually has been able to break the code that Templars used in these transaction documents. Which again brings us back to the number of codes that appear in the Rennes-le-Chateau story, which may have nothing to do with what Saunier found, but it's just a reminder to look at the Templars. What would happen is the pilgrims would present these letters to the next Templar stop on the way and be allowed to withdraw funds from their accounts. And then the page would be updated in the cipher and they could continue. In essence, it was like walking with a bank card on stuff that had been stored in the Templar holding area. As officially, the idea of lending money for interest was forbidden by the church. But the Templars sidestepped this with a very clever loophole. As one Templar researcher I read wrote, since they weren't allowed to charge interest, they charged rent instead. Because of this, their financial land and networks grew huge. They acquired large tracts of land both in Europe and the Middle East. They bought and managed farms and vineyards. They built churches and castles. They were involved in manufacturing, import, and export. They had their own fleet of ships, and at one point they even owned the entire island of Cyprus. The Orders of the Knights Templar arguably qualifies as the world's first multinational corporation. At least that's how it's trying to be presented today. Right? They're trying to present the Templars in modern terms. They're trying to present how they were doing their banking, how they were sort of had their hands worldwide. They want you to think that the Templars are just like modern bankers and modern business people. They're not. What is most interesting is that the Templars, almost for sure, were the ones involved in building the famous Gothic cathedrals. In fact, the naming of any church to Notre Dame only happens during the two main centuries of the Knights Templar. It mostly disappeared when the Templars died. R. A. Schwaller de Lubitz in Temple of Man emphasized that the Gothic cathedrals all conformed to an exact canon: 2 towers, a north axis, a triple nave, and 7 windows. On the walls, they have the Stations of the Cross, then the transept, and the entrance proper to the sanctuary. He claimed they followed the exact layout of Luxor Temple, and thus copied the layout of human form in all of its pi and phi properties. It's also interesting to note that many Templar churches are built of a unique structure that might be called a round church or a round temple. And this building practice is very important because it's going to link to another group called, you would know them as the Knights of the Round Table, but their real name is the Knights of the Rotunda. So I want you to keep this in mind, that the Knights Templar were key factors in the building or at least in the proper use of the Gothic cathedrals. So since we've had large discussions on that these cathedrals are more like machines, are more like energetic mechanisms, energetic power stations. The Templars were not building them as religious sites. They were building them as energetic structures. Why did the Templars need them? What were they doing with them? And what happened to these great cathedrals after the Templars were destroyed? A few things to keep in mind is that, once again, the Cathars and the Knights Templar have almost no real difference. In fact, if you look at the various Cathar family names from Inquisition documents, the names of the Templars of the same period are almost exactly the same. It's very odd that the one thing used in the Inquisition against the Knights Templar was not their association with the Cathars. And again, this is one part of history that I think, well, all of history is wrong, as we're coming to see. But a huge one is that there was an Inquisition and and a genocide of the Cathars in the 1200s, and an Inquisition and a genocide of the Knights Templar in the 1300s. And like I say, I think that's one event, one story. I don't know when that actually happened, 1200s, 1300s, 1700s, who knows. But I don't see it as two separate events. One event, one group. The Cathars and the Knights Templar are pieces of the same jigsaw puzzle. Certainly something was going on that the church needed to eliminate both of these groups, and it's usually over what's claimed what they knew. One of the most interesting things is one of their famed, I guess what you might call deities of the order, known as Baphomet. And I don't want to go into this massive story of what Baphomet is or is not. You can go and look that again up yourself. It has a devilish looking appearance, but that doesn't mean that's what it is. Hugh Schonfeld, the writer, by using something known as the Atbash cipher, applied that to the name Baphomet to get the Greek word Sophia, which is wisdom. Okay, maybe. Another claims that the word Baphomet comes from the Greek word Matis, meaning baptism of wisdom. Another claims it's from the Arabic word Abu Famat, which is the father of source, or the father of other understanding. I'm just keeping this in the back of your mind as you decide to look through this material, that the Knights Templar are involved in all of these very interesting things. And recall that all Gothic cathedrals have the most unique symbolism in their churches, from demons to green men to especially a very important veneration of women, a very important veneration of the Magdalene. The Magdalene was very important in the Gothic cathedrals. They're full of alchemic symbolism. You will get labyrinths on the floor of every one, even though the labyrinths have long been removed. Most of the Gothic cathedrals would have all had an original labyrinth somewhere in their church. So what happened to the Templars? Late in the mid-12th century, as the Muslim world began to take over more and more control, there began to be fights between the Christian factions in the Holy Land. Very specific quote, the Knights Templar were occasionally, it says occasionally, at odds with two other Christian military orders, the Knights Hospitalier and the Tuetonic Knights, and decades of feuds weakened Christian positions politically and militarily. They first relocated to Arques and were held for the next century, which they lost in 1291. Eventually, they lost their main strongholds of Syria, in Cyprus, and the Holy Land. Something that's not often discussed, but in 1305, the new Pope Clement V, who was based in France, sent letters to both the Templar Grand Master Jacques de Molay and the Hospitalier Grand Master Fulk de Villeret to discuss the possibility of merging the two orders. Neither was interested, and Clement persisted. And in fact, in 1306, he invited both of the Grand Masters to France to discuss the order. De Molay got to visit Clement I in early 1307, but the Knights Hospitalier Grand Master was delayed for several months. While waiting, there was a discussion of criminal charges that had been up against de Molay. King Philip of France seemed to be upset because he owed the Templars a lot of money from his last war with England. And this is usually claimed as the reason that the church and the Knights and the French government destroyed the Knights Templar, was a combination of the church worried of the power that the Templars were holding, the wealth that they had, and the debt that the French king had. However, it seems like the fact that, at least on for sure one side, probably both, the Hospitalier and the Templars had no interest in joining. And again, I'm thinking you're seeing enemies. You're seeing two different factions at war. If you decide to go in and dig into the history of the Knights of Malta and what they control now, like I say, what they're involved in, where their tentacles are, pretty much, this is one of the things that has always been claimed, that when the Knights Templars died, like all of these orders, they absorbed themselves into Freemasonry. And in fact, you can find names. There's a name of the, there's a ranking of the Knights Templar in Freemasonry. You reach a certain level, you gain that order. Same in the Knights of Malta. I think that's a hidden scam that's trying to again normalize all of these knights orders to make them all seem like they're the same, that they're all playing on the same page, they're all playing on the same team. And I don't think they are at all. To me, the Knights Templar are a very unique group, and in fact, almost like they have the job of the battling they're doing, the fight that's going on. This is going to be really important to understand what I'll be talking about in this series as we go forward. History as you know it that relates to this story of Rennes-le-Château, be it the stories of southern France, be it the stories of the Cathars, of the Knights Templar, be it the stories of, Saint Sulpice, be it the stories of Saunière and Boudet, be it the history of the New Testament, be it the Crusades. The truth, I think, is the opposite. Everything you think of as going one way, the truth is going the other way. They have turned everything backwards. Thus, in this one instance, just put this in your mind historically for just a moment. What if the Crusades is not about groups of Europeans going to the Holy Land, trying to capture something? What if it's the other way around? What if the Crusade is the opposite? If you start thinking about that and start thinking about some of the things I'll say at the end of this, you might start seeing where my research seems to be taking me. Anyway, without going into massive detail, you can read about the Inquisition that happened against the Templars, the tortures, the killings, the burnings. By 1314, huge members of the Knights Templar had been destroyed. By papal decree, at the end of this process, the property of the Templars was transferred to the Hospitaliers. The Hospitaliers got everything that the Templars had. And one has to ask carefully, why does the Pope and King Philip want to destroy the Templars and at the same time build up the Hospitaliers? And again, it's my conviction that the Knights Hospitalier were the private army of the Vatican. And even though the Templars appeared Christian on the surface and appeared to be sponsored by the church, just like the Cathars, they were something else. And in fact, they may have been the group opposing all of this. And as such, the energy that we are looking for today, the energy that those of us who know what's going on and need that underlying backing to pull us in a new direction in the world, it's the energy of the Knights Templar and the Cathars. Maybe. These are all just my opinions. These are all just my years of research and trying to put it into some kind of package, knowing that the historical message I get is not true, but there's truth in it. How can you unravel what's really true, spin it around? As Mr. Park, when I talk about this opposite, Mr. Park was the first one, the Korean monk I spent years with, was the first one to tell me, everything you believe is the opposite. Everything that you're being told, the opposite is true. Yeah. Again, it's unclear what happened to the Templars, because, in fact, only a few thousand were actually arrested during the Purge. Many thousands went unaccustomed for. Well, where did they go? And again, the suggestion is that they were absorbed into other orders like the Knights Hospitalier or the Teutonic Knights, or that the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians were running and they became Freemasons or Rosicrucians. My guess is maybe a few did that, but I think the order continued in secret. And there's lots of suggestions on what happened to them. Of course, there were Templar organizations in Portugal that changed their name from the Knights Templar to the Knights of Christ and seemed to continue for some time. One famous theory is that the entire Templar fleet of 18 ships immediately set sail from La Roche the day before the arrest started in France. And the suggestion is they went to Scotland, where their king, Robert the Bruce, who was excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church at the time, looked after them. There are many claims, of course, that those ships didn't just sail to Scotland, they sailed to the United States. And we'll get into that suggestion in just a moment, that the Templars in the USA are a key possible moment in, well, I guess I erased that, but the idea being is that the Templars came and set up North America to be their new place where they were going to live and, I guess you might say, defend their knowledge and their truth. And perhaps the voyages of Christopher Columbus to look for a new land was not about looking for new lands. Columbus was sailing with a whole bunch of soldiers looking for the Templar Knights. And that the battles that ensued on the continent first were not about Columbus taking over Indians. It was Columbus tracking down the Templars and battling them. Many scholars believe that a lot of Templars fled into the Swiss Alps because their records of Swiss villages at the time suddenly becoming very military skilled. And of course, the famous things like the Swiss Guard and Swiss military tactics became quite legendary after the time of the Templars. How does Switzerland become a military power? And why does it have, of course, the Swiss flag, which is a white cross on a red background, which is the Templar symbol in reverse, but is also, as we've seen, that's the flag of the Knights of Malta. Are they hiding themselves in Switzerland in such a way as to not be noticed? Also notice that there's an odd town in the Swiss Alps that has the name of Sion, that has a giant cathedral and monastery. And if this story in the Rennes-le-Château of the Priory of Sion is a real organization, it may have actually begun at this cathedral in the Swiss Alps, created by the Templars who fled here in 1307. Again, there's still, like I say, there's many other Templar legends, from what they found at their time in the Holy Mount, be it the actual Holy Grail, which if people think it's a cup and is in the Middle East, the Ark of the Covenant, certainly possession of certain relics. During the Inquisition trials, there was discussions of worshiping some type of idol, and this idol worship was very much leveled against them. And this took the mistaken belief that the Templars somehow practiced witchcraft, and that Baphomet is some sort of, again, form of black magic. But that's not what was going on, I don't think. Again, you have to recognize that the Holy Grail has been associated with the Templars right from the beginning. And even at the first Grail romance of 1180 by Chrétien de Troyes, who comes from that same area where the Templars were sanctioned. And in Wolfram von Eisenbach's version of the tale, known as Parzival, he refers to the knights called Templesian, who guard the Grail kingdom. And another hero of the Grail quest, Sir Galahad, who was a 13th century literary invention of the monks of St. Bernard's Cistercian order, was depicted as having a shield with a cross of St. George, which is very similar to the Templars' insignia. That's also another thing, because they're linked to St. George. And of course, the story of St. George and the Dragon, which is a vitally important story to understand, not only for the alchemic symbolism of the battling the dragon, representing not just the demonic parasitic mind, but the entire demonic parasitic realm, and that St. George is, by lancing and spearing and standing upon the dragon that you will see in the stories, is defeating the darkness of this realm. I think it was the Conspiracy or Us. I'll link it below. Really, really interesting channel. This guy is really interesting. He's been talking in the last couple of things that he's trying to claim that the 1,000-year reign of Christ has already happened, the Book of Revelation part, and that the return was as St. George, that the stories of St. George, who's venerated all over the world, is this Christ figure who has been, who already made his return. And we are now in the post part of that, the part where the 1,000 years are over, the devil's been released, and we are heading towards the final tribulation. I'm not saying I agree with that, but he does make some interesting observations, and you might want to check out what he says. It's at least interesting to look at. Another object that's claimed to have connection with the Templars is the Shroud of Turin. And in 1357, the shroud was first publicly displayed by a nobleman known as Geoffrey de Charnay. And he's described by some people as the grandson of one Geoffrey de Charnay, who was burned at the stake with de Molay. Now, of course, the shroud's origins are a tremendous controversy. What are they? How old are they? Is it from Leonardo da Vinci? We have no idea, but there is links between the Templars and the shroud. So where do we put this 45 minutes of information to? What can we say about these groups of knights? What we do know is that, according to the story, the Templars are destroyed by the Pope in 1307. All of their wealth went to the Knights of Malta, the Hospitaliers. Hence, it seems they had to be enemies at some level. And remember, this is a dual world. Within this reality, we are dual. Everything in it must have duality. You can't have darkness without light. So keep that in mind as you look into the stories of the Knights Templar. What is dark? What is light? Recall that the Knights of Malta had their sacred saint, St. John the Baptist, who the Cathars saw as the Antichrist. And so many have come to believe that the Templars and the Knights of Malta were one and the same, that they just had a brotherly fight somewhere along the way and the Templars lost. Even conspiracy head David Icke even thought that the Hospitaliers were a backup group for the Templars. That's how great the whitewash in history of who the Templars were and what they really may have been doing, what they really knew, and the fact that I think they're still around in some very deep underground form. To me, the Templars are the group that we need to bring back. This will also take us to a very interesting story in the 1600s of the founding of Canada, and specifically the founding of the city of Montreal, which may also link into the story of Rennes-le-Château, and a very unique thing where the Knights of Malta were trying to take control over all of Quebec, and this small group from St. Sulpice, led by John Ollier, sent a group of people in order, including under the guidance of Cardinal de Richelieu, in order to try to put a non-Knights of Malta figurehead in charge of Canada. It's a very interesting story. Some have even suggested that the part of the Poussin painting of 1840 with the tomb is actually depicting the four main members who left of the founders of Montreal, being Ollier, Duzevier, Maisonneuve, and Jean Mance. It's a story that has to be examined. It sounds a bit crazy on the surface, but there was actually an entire book. Do I have it on the shelf? Yeah. The Templars' Legacy in Montreal, and the New Jerusalem. Quite an interesting read. And what can we say about Napoleon? Because Napoleon, as soon as he sort of began his worldwide quest in 1798, on his way to Egypt, while Egypt was always considered his first major battle, his first major takeover, actually the first place he took was Malta. And you have to ask why. Why did Napoleon perhaps see himself as a Templar knight, or trying to regain the loss of the Templars by retaking the world back from them? Be reminded that the one movie Stanley Kubrick never made, but spent almost 10 years researching, was on Napoleon. Why? Why did Kubrick want so much to make a movie about Napoleon? What is the hidden underlying message Kubrick maybe knew and wanted to get across? But perhaps to really understand who the Templars were is maybe to see that they were either inspired by, or in fact may have been long descendants of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. Now, who exactly were the Knights of Arthur? It's always been claimed that this group was named after a great table. whereby all could meet and have an equal place. Some suggesting this being trying to be a myth of the 12 signs of the zodiac, all revolving around Arthur being the sun, similar to Jesus and the 12 disciples. Of course, there's 13 astrological signs. One has been lost over history, but the name Round Table didn't start appearing until the 12th century. And in fact, it was specifically Christianized by Robert de Boron in his book Merlin. And he's also the same person who Christianized the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail had never had anything to do with Christ or the Last Supper, or was even a cup until Robert de Boron. So you have to recognize that de Boron is the one who is seemingly the great falsifier of this early Grail history. Because the original name is not the Knights of the Round Table. They had a Latin name. It was Knights of the Rotunda. And a rotunda is not a round table. A rotunda is a round stone structure. To me, that would mean that links to the various round stone structures, i.e. English stone circles. And the feeling is that as the Knights of the Rotunda, their job was to protect the sacred landscape of England. They were protecting the ancient sacred places. When the Knights Templar came along, one of the first things they started building was round churches, which they called rotundas. And is this a very subtle and interesting way to say that they are descendants of Arthur's Knights of England, that they are in fact also not Arthur's Knights of England, or that they are in fact at least have a similar job? So what is the temple that they are in charge of protecting? If they are Templar Knights, then they're in charge of protecting a temple. What temple are they protecting? It's not the Holy Sepulcher. It's not the Temple Mount. They're not in Jerusalem. What if what they're protecting is in southern France? Or maybe what they are protecting is the Holy Sepulcher, the real one, the real Temple Mount, which maybe has nothing to do with the Middle East. Again, another of these opposites I want you to keep in mind as we go along is, what if the entire story we know of as New Testament history is the opposite? What is this temple that the Knights Templar are in charge of protecting? I think that's a good place to leave it at, just to give you some what would be different ideas on what the Knights Templar might have been, what their jobs were, what maybe happened to them, what didn't happen to them, and a whole bunch of historical ideas to maybe get you to just sit back and go, this guy is just talking crazy talk, or maybe this guy is leading us in a direction that might actually uncover some answers for us. And again, I don't know, right? I don't have the answers, and I don't have all the conclusions finished yet. I'm still in the process of figuring out something. Week by week as I go on when I do these, where is this taking me? What is the research showing me? And I'm just sharing it with you as I go without giving you all the details, all of the juicy bits until we get near the end. Thanks for joining and watching. I appreciate it. It's been a while since I've been here. I had a busy week last week with doing the 2 radio interviews. The one with Jay was very well received, and we have one with Crow 777 coming up on Monday. That's a 2-hour interview. We went through a lot of detail on a lot of different subjects in that interview. Of course, I have no idea how long this YouTube channel is going to stay up, to be quite honest. I think as the next few months go on, a lot of channels that are providing any kind of information that is not in a very specific squared box is going to start disappearing. And so on one level, I'd recommend that if there's something that you think is a very valuable video, something that you would like to perhaps see later on, you should download that and keep that and make sure you have it. It's also a good time because, again, we don't know how long the videos will stay up, how long even PayPal accounts will be around. There's stories of lots of things like those accounts being just unaccessed. So just this video today took me a few days and a lot of hours to put together. There's a lot of time even just to put this video together. And your donations are very much appreciated, and they help me not only, of course, financially to get some things done in the world, but make me feel like people are finding value in the time I'm putting into this. You're not obligated to do that, but it's something that I appreciate a lot. And given that we don't know how long we all have, if you're thinking of making one, now would be a good time to make that donation when we both know that the energy transfer can still happen. Well, with that, thanks for buying the books. A lot of books have been sold in the last week. I'm sure a lot more will get sold after The Crow is up. Leave your comments, leave your questions, leave your insights. I can't say I've got answers to this stuff. I'm digging in. Soon we'll be getting into the information on the Holy Grail, and even though I looked into the Holy Grail for a good 2 or 3 months and thought I understood it, only in the last few months have I got a completely different road. Like my understanding of what the Holy Grail might be just turned a giant left all of a sudden, and I'm trying to figure out how to present some of that down the road to you, what I think the Holy Grail might mean, and that will then take us into that document I mentioned, the Serpent Rouge, which showed up in 1967 in the Rennes-le-Château documents, which has been a lot of people have taken a crack at it to try to figure it out, and I now think it may really link to what the Holy Grail actually is referring to. So we'll leave it there. Thanks. I'll leave a short video on Monday when the video with the Crow is up, so you have a link so you can go watch that. And I will, I guess, do my next spiritual warfare video next week. I haven't done one of those for quite a while, and there's a lot of bizarre things in the world right now to talk about, so it's probably time to do the next episode of Spiritual Warfare. And we'll see you with a short video on Monday to take you over to the video I did with the Crow. Thanks, everyone.